Hi, everybody.
Welcome.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon. Nice to have you all with us. Just see that there are a couple of other people just waiting to come in, then we'll start in a minute. Okay, one. All right. Just to complete the Mishnah that we were studying last week, and we've Dafka designed every week here. Not that I should maybe not be telling you this, but we've Dafka designed these shiurim that you can log on at any time, and previous knowledge is not necessary. But we didn't quite complete last week's Mishnah, and we were speaking there about the great Shimon HaTzadik. So we spoke about Shimon HaTzadik, and we mentioned there that Shimon HaTzadik was the last of the men of the Great Assembly, and that he had said three things, and those three things were that we have to have the three things upon which the world stands: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilus Chasodim. So we spoke about Torah. The idea of Torah is not just to have the Torah as your guide, but also to study Torah. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Hello? Okay. I don't know what happened. I think I knocked myself out. Anyway, you have, can everybody hear me? Just if somebody can give some sort of feedback. Can you hear me? I don't know what's going on. I went off there for a moment. Can you hear me? Just give a thumbs up. Okay, good. All right. Thanks, Avrom. So we talked about Shimon HaTzadik is talking about three things upon which the world stands. And when we talked about Omed, we don't only talk about the fact that it is supports, but it's actually that the world depends on these things. For the world to thrive and for the world to reach fruition and do everything that it has to do, there's got to be Torah. There's got to be Torah, which is not just that the Torah exists in an Oren Kodesh, but Torah means Torah learning. There's got to be Avodah. Avodah doesn't mean that you've got to go to work and you've got to sell your wares, but Avodah means service of God. We talked about serving Hashem. Today it's replaced, the Avodah in the Beit HaMikdash is replaced by our prayer services. There was a sacrifice, an offering, a korban that was brought for Musaf, and there was a korban that was brought for Mincha, and there was a korban that was brought for Shacharit. And we need service. We need to build our relationship with the Almighty, with God, on a regular basis. And this is done through our avodah, our service of God. You know, we always speak about, or people walk out of shul and they say, oh, or sometimes they say that was a great service. This is where it comes from. What does it mean that it was a service? It was our serving of God, service of the Almighty, rather than kind of when you take your car in for a service. It's not, although that happens as well, I guess, when we daven. So the idea of avodah is working on our relationship with the Almighty. And then we have Gemilus Chasodim, Gemilut Chasadim. Now, here we hadn't completed this quite yet. We kind of rushed through it in the last few minutes last week. Let's just talk for a moment about Gemilut Chasadim or Gemilus Chasadim. What does it actually mean? If we think about the choice of words, it's very important. And we know that whenever we study something in Mishnah or in Torah itself, there's got to be a reason why the sage or the sages, or the people saying these things, Dafka chose those words. They could quite easily have said here, Shimon HaTzadik could quite easily have said, three things upon which the world stands is Torah, Avodah, and Tzedakah. He could have said that. They're three things, and we probably superficially would have had exactly the same meaning to it. Torah, meaning Torah, learning and observance. Avodah, serving God, doing our Avodat Hashem, our davening, our prayers. And Tzedakah, charity. This is the first glance of how we understand this concept of Gemilut Chasadim, which they translate in the various Sidurim. You'll see if you're on page 271 of the Chabad Siddur or page 544 of the Art Scroll Siddur, you'll see there that the way they translate Gemilut Chasadim is on kind deeds or on deeds of kindness. That's what we're talking about. Acts of kindness, deeds of kindness. Now the word Gemilut Chasadim, if we just unpack it a little bit more, we all know that the word chesed, chasadim, means kindness. So we're talking here about kindnesses. What does the word gemilut mean? Now, you know, in every Jewish town, there used to be something called the Gemilus Chesed. The Gemilus Chesed or the Gemilus Chasodim, the Gemilus Chesed organization, invariably in most towns, I remember growing up in Pretoria that we had one. I know that there was one here in Johannesburg. In most towns, this wasn't just a tzedakah fund, but much more importantly, it was actually known as a loan fund, loans. We talk about today, people talk about a Gemach. A Gemach is a loan fund. You would go to a Gemach now, and it comes from that word. Gemach is Gemilut Chesed. You would go to a Gemach, you get it? Gemach, Gimel, Gemilut Chasadim, that's what Gemach stands for. You would go there if you wanted to borrow money. You would go to a Gemach if you wanted to borrow. Today they have a Gemach, for instance, for wedding dresses, for colors who can't afford an elaborate wedding dress, and you're only going to wear the dress once, that you can go to a Gemach, a Gemilut Chesed, and you can borrow a wedding dress. That saves you on that. You have Gemachs today all over in Johannesburg and around the world that will loan you stuff to make it bar mitzvah, to put the decorations on the table. You can have a gemach. There are people who run gemachs, for instance, for tefillin, because tefillin are very expensive and maybe you can't afford, so you need to borrow for a while. But the concept of a gemach is a loan. Now, in Jewish thinking, what is the power of a loan to an individual? You know, when we talk about the sensitivity within the concept of giving tzedakah from a Jewish point of view, it's sometimes very, very sensitive and very difficult for a person to come along and say, I need 1,000 rand. It sometimes makes it a lot easier for that person if they know that they can borrow the 1,000 rand, to borrow it. Now, borrowing was always regarded as being a way whereby we actually are enabling, rather than disenabling, we are enabling the borrower not to feel that they're taking tzedakah. It's very difficult for people to take tzedakah, usually. In fact, it's a problem, I suppose, everywhere in the world, that it's difficult for people to take tzedakah in the beginning. People, unfortunately, can get used to it. And then they start thinking or feeling that that is the way that they earn their livelihood. And we're not supposed to be dependent on tzedakah. We're supposed to give tzedakah. We're supposed to only use tzedakah, of course, when it is necessary. Now, a gemach, something that is loaned to somebody, has the added advantage that it enables them a little bit. It enables them to do something perhaps with that money or with that loan and to repay it. And in other words, it's retaining perhaps a little bit more of the borrower's dignity. And this is really what it's really all about. There's supposed to be something about the dignity that is offered to the one who is coming and asking for that money. There's a very famous story that is told about one of the Rothschilds many years ago, that a particular individual came to one of the Rothschilds, to Baron Rothschild, and said, I need a loan. And he said to him, how much do you need? And he named them the sum. Let's say it was 20,000 francs or pounds or whatever it was that they were dealing in those days. So let's say 20,000 rand that he needed. And he says to him, okay, that's not a problem. I can give you that loan. The only thing is, the way that we work with these loans is that we work on a basis whereby you have to have guarantors. And you have to, in other words, somebody's got to sign surety for you. By the way, this is standard practice as well. The Gemilas Chesed will go out of business very, very quickly. The loan society will go out of business very quickly if people take loans and they don't pay back, and then it just can't carry on lending out the money. So there's always got to be the guarantee that it'll be paid back. And at the same time, you're preserving the dignity of the individual. And also these loan societies are not allowed to, the whole point is not to charge interest, not to charge them for this. It's given to them on a free basis. And this was what Rothschild told him. He said to him, can you bring somebody who will sign surety, will act as your guarantor? And the fellow said, I have nobody. I don't have anybody. So he said, come on, you must have a brother-in-law, a cousin, or something who can sign for you. And he said, no, absolutely nobody. Nobody will sign for me. I have nobody. So he said, well, you mean to say you go through life and you have absolutely nobody? You don't have a friend, you don't have a family member, you have nothing? He said, no, actually, my life is me and God. Me and God, that's it. I have the Abishta, I have the Almighty, I have God. That's the only one. So Rothschild says, do you think that God will guarantee this loan? And he smiles. Can't believe what he's actually hearing. And Rothschild apparently wrote on the bottom of the document, this loan is guaranteed by the Almighty. And they gave a time when it had to be paid back. Let's say it was a year later, that this guy agreed that he was going to pay back on a certain date. So imagine the date is the 1st of March. So in the 1st of March in 2022, his loan was going to fall due. And sure enough, that date came about. And Rothschild had it marked there, and he used to keep a careful track of the money that he lent out. And he waited for this fellow to arrive. The guy doesn't arrive. He thought he was an El Chayid. He was a trustworthy guy. And that was why he had written there that God guarantees the loan. And he waited for him. The guy didn't arrive. He didn't arrive for another few days. And about a week later, excuse me, he came rushing in, this guy, very emotional. And he says, I know you must be thinking that I'm a charlatan, that I'm a ganef, but I'm here to pay back my loan. I didn't have the money last week. I was too embarrassed to face you. I was running around. I was sweating. I was breaking myself in order to raise this money, in order to bring it, to pay you back. And I come with humblest apologies, and please, here's the money. And every penny is there, and he's ready to hand it over to Rothschild. Rothschild says to him, you actually don't owe me anything. And he said, why? Do you remember that we had the loan? Don't you remember? You wrote it down in your book. God guarantees the loan. And he says, well, I've got to tell you, your guarantor paid up for you. He says, what do you mean? He says, on the day that you were supposed to come, which was last week, you were supposed to arrive with the money for the loan. I sat around and I waited and I waited and I waited. And I knew that you would come because you're an honest man, but you actually didn't arrive. That night, I was mulling over what I should do when I had a deal that was on my table, and we were paid in this deal exactly the amount that you said you would bring. That was the extra profit that they added in that we didn't expect at the last minute. All of a sudden, it went up by that amount of money that we made. And I realized that Hashem, God, your guarantor, had actually paid back the loan for you. So now you owe me nothing. So he says, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm sitting here with the money. He said, no, but that's between you and God now. You must go and argue with your guarantor. See if your guarantor will do a deal with you on that money, but you certainly don't owe it to me. The guarantor coughed up the money. Now, why I tell you that story is because it gives us a little bit of the refinement within which a concept of a gemilut chasadim is supposed to take place. And here we come to this important word, gemilut. Now, you know, we also mention this word in one of the well-known Jewish events that takes place in our lives. You probably haven't seen it that much these days, and that's called when somebody benches Gomel, where you bench Gomel. A lot of people get it wrong, and they say they're going to bench Golem. Golem is something else. Golem is a body without a soul. Golem is like what was made in Prague. The Golem of Prague is a completely different word. In Hebrew, Gomel, Hagomel, and we say the bracha Hagomel if we've traveled overseas. That's why you don't hear it that much. But if a person recuperates from a life and death kind of a situation, or if they're released from imprisonment, or if they've traveled across the sea and so on, there is a bracha called Hagomel, which is made at the Torah on a Monday or Thursday or on a Shabbos, Shachris or Mincha, where we say Hagomel, Hagomel l'chayavim tovot shigmalani tov. We talk about God having bestowed upon us. The word Hagomel actually means bestowed upon us. What is the meaning of this concept of bestowing upon us? So when we think about chasadim, you know, sometimes we can be a little bit flippant in the way that we give out our chesed. The concept of bestowing means that it's bestowed, it's given in the nicest possible fashion, is one interpretation. Think about the fact that God bestows upon us kindnesses. God doesn't just say, okay, there you go, you're like, let's just press a button and you're in. It's bestowing. Bestowing means that there was a sincerity within it. There was a kindness within the giving. There was something important and powerful in the way that it was done. And perhaps this is what Shimon HaTzadik is referring to. When it comes to chasadim, when it comes to doing acts of kindness, we need to make sure that the way that it's done is nice as well. Now here I'll pause for a moment and tell you something else interesting. You know, when we give something to somebody, Torah tells us that the way of giving should be with our more powerful hand. Why I say more powerful hand? Because it actually says right hand, but that's understood to be the right hand of a right-handed person. When we give to somebody, when you're giving tzedakah, you should give it with your right hand. If you're left-handed, you give it with your left hand. When we are doing acts of kindness, it should be with our right hand. Why? To show that we really mean it, that it's with sincerity. You know, Torah talks about things that are given in a way that we call kila achar yad. Kila achar yad means we kind of giving it in a backwards fashion. Can you imagine? I'm taking something and I'm giving it to somebody and I'm giving it over my shoulder. Is that nice? It's not really nice. The person is receiving it and they feel like nothing on earth in the way that I'm giving it. I've got to give in a kind way. I should do it, besever upon in the office. It's fortunate when we go on Zoom that we can see each other's smiles and we can see the faces. We don't have to be presented with masks, but we're supposed to do it with a countenance that's kind, in a kind way. This maybe is what Gemilut Chasadim means. Give it in a nice way. Don't do it in a backwards fashion. By the way, when we're pouring a drink for somebody, you pour a drink, you should always pour it with your right hand, and you should always pour forwards. Now here we have another thing, and that's why? Because why do we pour forward? You know, like they show in the old movies, I guess, where you, like, it's a cool thing in a pub to pour backwards. They hold the vat or the jar or the jug and they pour over the back of the hand. We never do that. The only place that is done is when they are preparing a body for burial. They pour water over the body and it's done backwards. Why? They want to show a reluctance. So there you have it. Pouring backwards or pouring with the left hand or over your shoulder or over the hand, that's called kila achar yad. That's not doing it with like a full extension of oneself and giving it a kind and a beautiful fashion. And this is what Gemilut Chasadim means. It's not just kindness. You can do kindnesses without putting the heart and soul into it, without making it feel proper and meaningful and nice, and doing it with a nice countenance. Maybe that's what Gemilut Chasadim means. But to those who suggest that Gemilut Chasadim, this idea of bestowing kindness, is really telling us that we are not saying this is now going to be the end of it. Gemilut Chasadim, this idea of bestowing, is that I'm doing a kindness to you in a way whereby I'm helping you to get up onto your own 2 feet. And from here, we actually learn that the concept of Gemilut Chasadim really, and that's why with a Gemach, the loan of money, is meant to be that we are enabling a person to get back on their own 2 feet. We're not doing a tzedakah handout that will enable him perhaps to just pay the lights and water, but actually he doesn't know where his next meal is going to come from. Gemilut Chasadim is give in a way of perhaps a loan, or do it in a way whereby we are helping a person not just to eat, but to be able to provide for his family. So it's from here that one of the biggest acts of Gemilut Chasadim, for instance, is to give a person work, to give them a job to do. If you, what's the old adage there? If you teach a man to fish, it's much better than giving him the fish. If you teach him to fish, yes, he may be starving at the time, and you might have to give him the fish to start off with. But the whole point here of Gomel, Gemilut Chasadim, is enabling the person with kindness, enabling them with kindness, bestowing kindness upon them. This isn't just a one-off thing where they can take that money or that food and eat and pay their bill and so on, and then go off into the great blue yonder. This is much more a possibility of actually setting them up and making sure that they are now sustainable. And that is explained by our sages as being this concept of Gemilut Chasadim, making sure that people have sustainable kindness, that the kindness that you give them is something that will help to sustain them. We're going to move on to the next Mishnah. So if you're on page 271 in the Chabad Siddur or page 544 in the Art Scroll, you come to the next Mishnah. And here we come across an interesting name for a rabbi, because it says, Antigonus ish Socho. Antigonus, who was a man of Socho. Socho is the name of the place. So Antigonus came from Socho. It says he was ish Socho. Kibel mishimon hatzadik. He received it from Shimon hatzadik. Now, let's pause there for a moment and say, as we said, everything is very exact in the words of the Mishnah. We didn't say this by Shimon hatzadik. When we saw Shimon HaTzadik, if you go up a few lines, you see that when it came to Shimon HaTzadik, it just says he was one of the men of the Great Assembly, and he said X, Y, and Z. He said Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. Here we're introducing Antigonus ish Socho by saying that he received it. He received the oral Torah, the traditions, and so on that were handed down. And this Mishnah and so on, that was handed down in the form that it was then, which was an oral law, he received it from Shimon HaTzadik. He got it from Shimon HaTzadik. So what are we saying? We're saying here actually that Shimon HaTzadik was part of the men of the Great Assembly. Remember, we said that. So there was no handing over then, so to speak, of the tradition to a next generation. Antigonus represents the leadership, and they say that the word ish shows his leadership. He was a man of Socho. He wasn't just from Socho. He was a man of Socho. His name was Antigonus, which we'll come to in a moment. Antigonus was an ish Socho, and he kibel mishimon hatzadik. He received the oral Torah, he received all these traditions. He received them. Kibel, remember we spoke about that. He brought it close. He did it well. He led the Jewish people after Shimon HaTzadik. So he was part of the next generation, a generation later after Shimon HaTzadik. He was part of the great people at the time, but he was certainly not from the men of the Great Assembly. He was a next generation. Although we said that Shimon kind of brought it and bridged it into the next generation. We spoke about that last week. Antigonus was clearly from the next generation. He never was involved with the men of the Great Assembly. He received the Torah from them. Now, where does he get a name Antigonus? Antigonus classically and categorically doesn't sound like a Jewish name. One of the things that's written about him, there's not a tremendous amount that is written about Antigonus ish Socho, but there's a lot more written about who his students were than about him himself. But it seems to be that this Antigonus that came from Socho bore testament to what we discussed last week, that in the time of Shimon HaTzadik, that a lot of people started naming their children Alexander. Alexander was the Macedonian ruler, remember, Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, to remind you, he came to Yerushalayim. He was hell-bent on destroying Yerushalayim. And as he approached there, Shimon HaTzadik kind of managed to talk him down from it just by being there. He recognized the greatness of Shimon HaTzadik. He walked with him hand in hand into the Beit HaMikdash. He never destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. He never destroyed the temple. He wanted his statue to be put up there. The sages said no, but they gave him the alternative, which was that all Jewish boys born into the priesthood, and some say all Jewish boys in that year, would be named Alexander. They would be named after him. Here we come to Antigonus. Antigonus has got a Greek name. This is a name that is not Jewish. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't call any of my kids Antigonus, right? It's not so the male would look at you a little bit funny if you're naming your kid at the bris and you say his name is Antigonus, even today. But then it seems that in deference to the Greeks at the time and the influences of the outside, even somebody like a great leader of the Jewish people at the time carries this name Antigonus, and there's not much more that's written about exactly why and how he got that name, but it's remarkable that his name is actually a Greek name. He was the next generation, Vehu Haya Omer, and he used to say, this was what he said, Al tiyeyu ka'avodim hameshamshim es harav al manas lekabel pras. Do not be like the servants who serve their teacher, their master, al manat lekabel pras, in order to receive reward. Ella, hevu ka'avodim hameshamshim et harav shelo al manat lekabel pras. But be like the servants who serve their master, or administer to their master, not to receive a reward. And let the fear of heaven be upon you. What is he telling us? Antigonus Ish Socho is telling us that we should not be doing things for rewards. We should be doing things for the sake of doing them. You go on from the things that Shimon HaTzadik taught us. Why do we learn Torah? So we say, you know what, I learned Torah because it's going to bring me success. Says Antigonus, don't do that because it's going to bring you success. Do it because God said you must learn Torah. Or I'm going to serve Hashem because he'll be kind to me. If I say my prayers properly, Hashem will shower me with blessings. Al manat lekabel pras. You're doing it for the reward? Don't do it for the reward. Do it because of the fear of heaven. That's what he says. He ends off and he says, make sure that you have the fear of heaven upon you. That's why you do it. We do it. Why? Because God is in charge and he told us that we must pay homage to him and we need to daven to him and we need to pray and we need to be part of that. Why are you doing things for other people? So you could do things for other people for a number of reasons. One is that it'll make you look like a good guy. You know what? I want everybody to know that I helped out somebody who was down and out. So I'm going to put a tips on, I suppose, on today. You know, I'm putting it on Facebook and Instagram and wherever else I can post it. And I want to make sure that everybody knows. In the olden days, they used to insist on having a plaque on top of the door or making sure that everybody knew and that perhaps it was advertised in the newspaper that I had given X to this and this society or to this and this person, and therefore, really, what was I doing it for? I wanted to see my name in bright lights. I wanted everybody to say what a wonderful guy I am. Says classically, Antigonus Ish Socho, Jews, remember, don't do that. Don't have your relationship with God or with your fellow man for the reward, for what you're going to get out of it. Do it in a way whereby you are much rather saying, I am doing this for the sake of God. God said, do kindness, I'm doing kindness. God said, learn Torah, I'm learning Torah. God said, pray, I'm praying. God said, keep Shabbos, I'm keeping Shabbos. That's why I'm not doing it for any other reason, any other rewards. Now, there was an issue, and I told you that some of Antigonus Ish Socho's students were perhaps better known than he was. He had students, Antigonus. He had supposedly a way of teaching whereby he introduced, and it's actually a fascinating thing, but you know, today, if you go to yeshivas, we have this concept of a chavrusa program, chavrusa learning, where you sit with two people together, you debate subjects and so on. They actually pinpointed that it goes all the way back to Antigonus. Antigonus had this idea of pairings. They were, his students studied in twos. They compared notes with each other. And he had some students who were very, very diligent and very obedient. He had a couple who went off the rails. And one of the things that they utilized was this very saying. And we're told that they actually misinterpreted it. They got it in the wrong way. And what they actually used from this is that Antigonus was actually expressing to them that there is no olam haba. There's nothing in the hereafter. He was saying, people are spending too much time thinking about the world to come. They're thinking about doing things. You know what? I don't have to do this for now. I know that when I go to Shamayim, when I'm in the next world, there I'll be looked after. You know what? I'd rather have that, much rather. It seems to be, they said, from the way that Antigonus expressed this, was that he was saying, there is no olam haba. There's nothing that comes afterwards. What's he saying? Don't do it for the reward. Do it for the here and now. That's what he's saying. Live in the moment would be the modern interpretation. The Rambam Maimonides points this out and says that this was the mistake that some of his students made. One of them was known as Tzadok, and he gave rise to what were known as the Tzedukim. I think it was the Tzedukim, but one of them was known as he gave rise to the Bartusim. His name was Bartus, I think. He gave rise to the Bartusim, who were like the Tzedukim of old, whereby they said that we're living Torah just according to the written Torah, not according to the oral law. They stuck to things that way, and they in fact caused all sorts of difficulties and breakups and fragmentation of the Jewish people. So we've got to go back to think about what exactly was it that Antigonus Ish Socho was telling us. He wasn't telling us that there's no hereafter, says the Rambam. He wasn't telling us that there's nothing to work for in the future. But don't make it all the time that you're doing it because you're counting the rewards. You know why I'm doing this? Is because I'm going to get something out of it. You know why I'm serving God? Because there's going to be a benefit to me. Do things without an agenda. Stop doing these things in the name of, or for the sake of God or Torah, or for your fellow man, because there's something that you can gain. To live your life all the time in thinking that what am I going to get out of it? You become what my father used to refer to as an eye specialist. You become a specialist in eye. This is all about me. Me. It's all about me. This is what I can get out, and this is what I can do. This is about developing me. It becomes a very egocentric and arrogant kind of a Yiddishkeit that you're living. No. Do it for the sake of the mitzvah. Do it for the sake of the other individual. Have the nachas of just seeing the mitzvahs being done, Hashem's word being fulfilled, and being able to bring us all a lot closer to the Almighty. We will continue, please God, next week at 1 o'clock and continue, finish off this Mishnah, hopefully, and move on to the next one. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being here. As we said, we're going to try and keep these strictly to half an hour. We hope that I was able to share something with you and you learned something today. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care.